Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. We're going to talk about a little bit about the past, how we got to where we are today, and the launch pad to the glorious future ahead of us. This is the journey through Canada's isotope history. And really, Canada's isotope history is the global isotope history because Canada was in on the ground floor and was a strong leader in this whole area. So really, it's the story of the world's introduction to cobalt-60 and other medical isotopes. Okay, so actually the story begins with Canada's first Nobel Prize at the turn of the last century. The great Lord Rutherford was at McGill University, which not many Canadians know. He's working there with a British chemist, radiochemist named Frederick Soddy, and these folks and a few other people, including Canada's first nuclear physicist, Harriet Brooks, and the first female master's student at McGill University, and she was a grad student of Rutherford, so she's working with Rutherford. But Rutherford is actually pinning down what radiation is, where it comes from. He's inventing the word half-life, he's inventing the word gamma, alpha, and beta that we use today. They were just expedient terms at the time, but they kind of stuck. And he's basically putting everything in place for the development of isotopes, which was discovered a few years later by Frederick Soddy, who's in that photo once he went back to England. And so the groundwork was done at McGill University in Canada. The first radioisotope in Canada was radium. So around the same time that Rutherford's working in McGill, you have the Curies working in Paris, and they've discovered polonium, they separated radium. Radium is the first brachytherapy isotope, and we're starting to use that in Canada in 1910 in Toronto. And in Montreal in 1922, these radium institutes start up. Now we're obtaining this radium at great expense from abroad. We happen to have the world's mother lode of uranium ore and its daughter product radium elsewhere in Canada. That is discovered in the 1930s, and then we're off to the races. Now we're making this stuff. It's still at great expense, but it is so valuable that it's actually worth it to mine it in the Northwest Territories and to ship it down to 5,000 kilometers to Port Hope, Ontario for processing. That's how expensive radium was. It was a boutique drug at the time. Only the rich people could use it, so it's not the beginning of commercial, publicly available radioisotopes, but it is Canada's first radioisotope. Then in the 1930s, the collective we, the nuclear community, started to be able to make radioisotopes. So now you're not having to separate a gram of radium from 6 tons of uranium ore. Now you can actually fire particles, or you can let charged particles, alpha particles, impinge on things and make isotopes, or you can let neutrons go into the middle of nuclei and make isotopes. And this is happening now at the beginning of the first half of the 1930s. And 2 Nobel Prizes came from that. You had the Joliot-Curies. So Frederick Joliot-Curie is Madame Curie's son-in-law, and he's working with Madame Curie's daughter. They win a Nobel Prize for using alpha particles for the first time to make radioisotopes. And then later in the year, Enrico Fermi says, I can do that even better. I can do that with neutrons. They have no charge. They'll just trickle in, and they can make isotopes as well. So in 1934, he does that. He actually fissions the uranium at that point in 1934, but he doesn't know it until 4 years later when they discover fission. And that's how crazy fission was, that the smartest people in the world didn't know that they had done it for 4 years. Okay, so they get Nobel Prizes for that. Ernest Lawrence and his team over in University of California at Berkeley, they're like, what the heck? We have these cyclotrons. I think we've been making artificial radioisotopes all the time. We just missed another Nobel Prize for making radioisotopes. So they're doing this also starting in the 30s. The Berkeley isotopes start to be released, sodium, phosphorus, carbon. You see it listed there. They also create technetium, which is not a radioisotope. Well, it is, but it's not the one that we're thinking of. But it's the technetium that was predicted, and they created it with their cyclotron. So fantastic things are happening in the 1930s. It culminates with the most fantastic thing of all, which is, so Fermi's got these slow neutrons that he's creating with a neutron generator. Now he creates the biggest neutron generator of all nuclear reactors. And then we're really off to the races. So this is in 1942 in Chicago. Fission, of course, was discovered in 1939. Again, the smartest people in the world that did not see this coming. Again, it took a woman scientist, a female scientist, Lisa Meitner, to be thinking outside the box and to piece the pieces of nuclear science together that had been culminating since then, since the early part of the century, and come up with the theory of fission. Unfortunately, not winning a Nobel Prize for it. The guy in the picture got the Nobel Prize. But Fermi built the first reactor in Chicago, and then for the first time, with neutrons, you can make commercial radioisotopes. What's this got to do with Canada? Well, of course, then we are around at the same time working on our nuclear program. So we are in parallel with Fermi's reactor in Chicago. In fact, our first reactor in downtown Ottawa predates Fermi's reactor in Chicago. Ours just didn't go critical. And so George Lawrence, who built it, did not become famous and get a Nobel Prize for it. Famous only within Canada, and the second president of the CNSC. So Canada's first reactors started up because Britain subsumed its nuclear program under the Manhattan Project, but also created this sort of satellite project in Canada with the help of the Canadian government and the National Research Council. There was a laboratory set up at the University of Montreal. They designed the NRX reactor. They designed the chemical separation process for plutonium, because the war was on, and this was the main military rationale at the time for these reactors. But they designed the NRX reactor for much more. They knew where the money was coming from. They knew the money was military, but the war would end soon, and they built that reactor with irradiation sites, beam tubes, pneumatic rabbits. They're building what we call a research reactor today, and a huge one, massive one, and they knew they were going to make medical isotopes. The first radioisotopes were shipped in 1947, a few months after the reactor started up. So right there you can see they were thinking about this way ahead of time, working with the medical community, and they shipped them to the University of Saskatchewan. Then you had the big one, cobalt-60. So who needs radium when you can make cobalt-60? And so this is what you can do with a large research reactor, 40 megawatt research reactor eventually became at Chalk River. And this was done in 1951. So the reactor starts up in 1947. By the end of 1951, we have the first patient being treated with cobalt-60 and adding this massive tool to the war against cancer at the hospital in London, Victoria Hospital in London, and shortly afterwards at the University of Saskatchewan, which has been leading on radioisotopes before that, during that, and ever since. Then you get into our early isotope factories. Now, so we're still government controlled, government funded. The government builds a younger sibling of NRX. They build the NRU reactor, 10 times more powerful, 10 times as many neutrons, and this becomes the first time NRX was the entry into the market, and NRU enabled commercialization and equity medical care around the world. You can now make radioisotopes and you can, in such quantities that you can ship them anywhere in the world. In its heyday, NRU could supply the world's supply of Moly-99, cobalt-60, if it wanted to, and occasionally had to. About half of the world's supply from the 1970s of Moly-99, and so 5 million patients a year. And I need better glasses. And then supplied, so the government's in charge of this until the late 80s. And then, okay, we're split up into the companies. In Canada, you have the medical isotopes, the Theratronics, and the cobalt-60. So, but government of Canada did what a government is supposed to do, is the heavy lifting, the massive reactor, which continued to operate, and enabling the private companies to take the product to the market. That brings us to today's medical isotope ecosystem, which is the subject of this meeting today and tomorrow, and it's now vast. We still have the government of Canada involved, but in a much lower level. The big thing the government of Canada can provide is the continuing leadership that in this area that it was demonstrating right from the beginning, right from when Clarence Decatur Howe, the minister of everything during World War II, declared, okay, let's go, and he signed off on this nuclear enterprise, which he didn't fully understand himself. He was an engineer, but he didn't fully understand all the details. He just knew that it meant medical isotopes. And it also meant electricity, perhaps, down the road. And being at the forefront, more than anything else, Canadian sovereignty. This was the end of World War II when Canada had already stepped up. And it was at the forefront of what we call now a middle power can do for the world. Can do for the world, unintended. Okay, so here's the ecosystem. It's, I'll look over here because the font's way too small down there. But you have the CANDU power reactors making isotopes. They've been doing that for decades. They're increasingly doing that now. They are not just really, really good power reactors. They are really good neutron sources that you can get things into and out of because of the low pressure moderator. You have Triumph out west making PET isotopes, and increasingly around the country we're looking at the targeted alpha therapy isotopes. The Saskatchewan Centre for Cyclotron Sciences, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, looking at the alpha particle targeted therapy isotopes. McMaster Nuclear Reactor, an anomaly of research reactors in that it is funding its operation through isotope sales. That is a crazy situation to be in and a fantastic situation to be in. The ecosystem of hospital PET isotopes and the private radioisotope industry, some of whom I referred to, but also none of that would work if you didn't have an extremely efficient distribution and transportation network, which we have today. So if you will allow me a vision for tomorrow, my vision needs to be improved, but I can look over here. Oh, so the vision for tomorrow is, from Jeremy, is that we need to, of course, continue down this path and have precision diagnostics and therapy to increase the effectiveness and decrease the side effects of radiotherapy and diagnosis, expanding the capabilities, so the machines and the radiations that we use, and also the use cases and the diseases that we can fight, making all of this global, continuing to make it global and expanding, making this available in the heart of Africa, and doesn't matter if it's places where they don't have nuclear programs. You can deliver these isotopes. Better still, you can deliver the means by which the isotopes can be made there. And so that is a vision for tomorrow. And increasingly, indigenous partnerships. So this, of course, is the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation working at the Bruce, making the TCM-177, which is a reflection that goes way back to when we first started to dig radium out of the Northwest Territories and ship it 5,000 kilometers to Port Hope. And the Dene people were carrying sacks of uranium ore, not fully cognizant of what they were carrying on their shoulders and the health dangers. And so you fast forward to 2026, and we are working with the indigenous people making medical isotopes in a Canadian design power reactor on Lake Huron. And so more indigenous partnerships of that nature. So we hear today about Canada being a superpower in energy, sovereignty concerns, and I ask this question of my students: when did Canada become a nuclear superpower? Are we a nuclear superpower now? And if so, when did we become one? And my answer to that, after we discussed that for quite a bit, this is my answer. We became a nuclear superpower when we emerged from World War II, the devastation of that horrible, violent event, with a peaceful research vision. So we have the second largest nuclear project in the world at that time. We could have made nuclear weapons, and we didn't. We invested in cobalt cancer therapy and nuclear medicine. Peaceful research vision, the most powerful science machine on the planet, the NRX reactor at Chalk River, and isotopes to fight cancer, almost immediately after World War II. So, you don't need to see that. That's my talk. Thank you very much. Onwards.